To me, one of the least cool things to do is to write tests. I'm not a huge fan of the process of writing them because they're kind of tedious, but they are incredibly useful to keep your site's integrity up really, really high. So let's go ahead and write our first test. First of all, I'm going to import the model into tests. So we'll go ahead and do from.models. We're going to import that video model. And we're just going to go ahead and say video model test case, and literally calling it model because I will have other kinds of tests. And we'll just do test case. So now what I want to do is just do define setup. So setup is where I'm going to actually create some of my models. So what I want to do is just do video.objects.create and title equals to this is my title. And that's it. Now I'm going to go ahead and define test valid title. And it's going to say self. And what was the title I named it? Well, it's this right here. So I'm going to go ahead and reference that and give it a variable up here. And I'm going to go ahead and then do video, or let's give a query set and say video.objects.filter title equals to title. And I'm just going to go ahead and say self.assert true qs.exists. Okay, we'll talk about more with query sets and model managers in a little bit. But now we actually have a test that hopefully is valid. So let's go ahead and run it with python manage.py and then the video name. Oops, not video name, but rather test video name, or the app name rather. And it ran in 1 second, or in less than 1 second, it ran one test. Okay, so a few attributes about tests that are really cool. Number one is the actual class itself. It inherits from the class name here. The name that I gave it is arbitrary. You can name it whatever you like, much like the models. We can name it whatever we like. But the setup method here, that method is something you absolutely have to name correctly. If you don't name it correctly, it will not actually add data into our quote-unquote test database. So that's actually what's happening. It creates a test database for us. So it's not actually using our main Django database, which we haven't really even talked about, but it does create its own isolated database, and then it adds whatever we add to it. So that's what setup does. This actually adds that into the database. And then we actually can run a test. So to run a test, we have to declare it with test underscore, and then whatever we want to call it. So I could call this test, and that will actually run that test, which is really nice. Okay, so we can also test a few other things like test created count, something like that, created count. And again, I can get my query set here, which just gives me a list of items in there. And now I can do qs.count, and we can assert equal. So assert equal and just add in a couple values in here. In this case, it's going to assert that, hey, this is only one item. Because my setup method, I only created one item. So again, I run some tests, and what do you know? I only created one item. Now, why is this important? Well, let's actually see why it's important by breaking this test in the next one.